Dr. Parul Popat with us, and I would request Mayur sir to welcome her with a memento. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. And now I would request all the panelists. The moderator of this session is Dr. Parul Popat, ma'am. She's an associate professor and head of the department in SP University. Yeah. So we have Professor Dr. R.P. Jadeja, sir, Professor Kamal Mehta, sir, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, sir, Professor Sunil Shah, sir, and Mr. Arindam Banerjee with us in the panel, and Dr. Parul Popat, ma'am, is going to moderate the session. I would quickly give the introduction of the honorable guests, and I would start with the youngest one, Mr. Arindam Banerjee. Mr. Arindam Banerjee is an educator and is actively working as an English language professional for more than a decade. At present, he is freelancing as an independent English language assessment professional with IDP India for Cambridge English exams. In his professional career, he worked as an English teacher for various CBSE schools in Anand and has worked in capacity of coordinator and vice president of Hanifa School. I would cut it short and tell you, friends, that he is an alumnus of Patel institution. He is a local hero for us, and he is graduated from Nalini Arvind, and he has pursued his B.Ed and MAELT from Patel Institute. He was awarded a gold medal for securing highest marks in the practicals, and we welcome Mr. Arindam. Yeah. Professor Sunil Shah, sir. Now this is a guru-chela relationship. You can see that there is a guru there. Dr. Sunil Shah is a professor at Department of English at Veer Narmad, South Gujarat University, Surat. He has a teaching experience of more than 17 years in the field of higher education. His areas of specializations are ELT, corpus linguistics, material production, among many other subjects. He is a recognized PhD guide with Veer Narmad, South Gujarat University. 5 students have completed their PhD so far, and 6 students. Oh. Once again, I would like to tell you that Professor Sunil Shah was also professor in MAELT in the Patel Institute. So, welcome you, sir. Again, one more a champion in a way, we can say that Dr. Atanu Bhattacharya is here with us. He was also professor in MAELT in the Patel Institute of English Training and Research. Professor Bhattacharya is now a professor and chairperson at Center of English Studies, Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. His area of expertise are language teaching, technology, cultural manifestation of impact of technology, speculative fiction, and so on. A perfect blend of language and literature is reflected in the scholarly teaching and research work that he has done so far. He has been honored with IATEFL Right Tongue Scholarship, UGC Research Associateship, and the prestigious British Hornby Trust Scholarship. Sir, we welcome you wholeheartedly. There are many things to say about him, but I am cutting it short. Sorry for that. We have Professor Kamal Mehta, sir. Is Gurunam Guru. There are so many students here sitting. I have seen many vice chancellors standing up when he entered the room. Welcome, sir. Professor Kamal Mehta, sir, is a professor, Department of English, Saurashtra University, Rajkot. He is in the field for more than 32 years. He has produced more than 24 PhD students. He has completed 2 major and 3 UGC minor research projects. Raja Rao, Nepal, Gujarati and Indian English short stories. He has published 8 books and around 20 papers and literature translations. One more book is in the pipeline, is being published. He is a member of Board of Studies of so many universities. If I name, there would be 6 to 7 universities. He was the director of BCUD for 5 years and director IQC of the university for 6 years. His expertise in Indian poetics, comparative literature, and so many other subjects. Even about Mehta sir, we can go on speaking, but I would cut it short again. Uh, Dr. R.P. Jadeja sir has already been introduced by Mayur sir, and we all know him. So I would not introduce him, but I would like to hand over the session to ma'am.
A very good afternoon to one and all. The panel discussion on common Indian framework of reference for languages. I am really privileged and honored to be here when my gurus and somebody to whom I look forward to whenever I need any inspiration or guidance are all there. So it's a moment of pleasure also, and I consider it's a matter of challenge also, whether I'll be living up to their expectation and whatever are the objectives behind this panel discussion, I help them meet. Now, all of us have heard the terms A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and the purpose is they serve as well, because we all are connected with language teaching and language learning, because they are also used for various academic and professional purposes also. And the framework which is used, which has defined all these terms, we all know CEFR. Now this CEFR, it was developed in late 1990s, and it actually described various levels, because these are descriptors which define one's competency in English language. Now, this was developed over the years by team of experts, by team of teachers, and today it is recognized and used as a reference. Taking it further, in 2011, the idea for a CAFR emerged, and today we are here at HM Patel, where we are talking about CIFR. In India, all of you must have observed that whenever you are filling up any application form, there is a section wherein you are asked to rate yourself in terms of language proficiency, reading, writing, speaking, the languages, right? And we do self-assessment, I put appropriate tick mark. However, this self-assessment has no authentication. It is based on my perception of my ability. Recently, many interviews were conducted for grantee-NET colleges of Gujarat. And therein I observed that there were candidates who were from other states. They appeared, were eligible also, and got absorbed also. But the challenge with them was that they did not know, or they don't know rather, Gujarati. And the place where they were recruited and the students whom they would be serving, would be teaching, are from rural Gujarat. And they don't know any other language except Gujarati. And Gujarati also, we cannot say actually how much do they know. Now in such a scenario, however skilled that person is, but the question remains whether he or she would be able to deliver, teach language that he or she is expected to. And this is not one scenario or one situation where we need some kind of certification, some kind of framework that can help people, social mobility, people who are going from one state to the other. And this is only grantee-NET colleges, government sector. The another area, non-government organization, the number is very large. So, this is probably the need of the hour that we think about something like CIFR. And I'm really happy that today this is happening over here at HM Patel. Now, to take this panel discussion further, what we would do, I would request each panelist to share the opinion in 5 minutes. Oh, the time again has been curtailed. Okay, 5 minutes followed by 2 minutes of observation of other panelists, and then we would move forward. So, I would now first request, as he was introduced by Sir Gurunam Guru, Kamal Mehta sir, to start and share his views, right? Need, prospects, challenges, everything we plan to cover within the time available to us.
We have assembled here to discuss the need for and the way in which it can be developed. I mean the common Indian framework of references. I have only 2 points to make. Number one, it is most essential to frame. We really need a common Indian framework. Secondly, I believe that in the contemporary time, it is necessary, no doubt, to look at the European framework because they have done wonderful thing, but we are not in a position to accept it as it is because our conditions are different, our requirements are different, and therefore, though we have lot of salutations to that, it has been done so meticulously, so well, but we will have to prepare our own framework. If I go back for 1 second, Panini used to teach Sanskrit to foreign students who used to come to India. And he used to teach Sanskrit to them, Sanskrit as the second language. Reason was very simple, that the medium of instruction was Sanskrit. And the students who came from outside, they did not know Sanskrit. The problem with him was that he had to teach all types of students of different levels of understanding of language. There was no specific way of addressing a certain group, and therefore his task was very difficult, but he did it. But had he been given the kind of framework that is available today, then he would have done even wonderful things. Lot of people have now started coming to India for studies because all our private universities are full of foreign students. In Rajkot itself, more than 3,000 students are there. More than 3,000 in all private universities. And they come from different parts of the world. And they have medium of instruction which is English. Naturally, we need that they understand the teachers. They understand the communication. They understand how to write what they want to write. And therefore, it is necessary to group these students into different types or different levels so that from where they can be picked up, in fact, we can try to pick them up. You know that language is the only, not the only, but one of the major defining qualities of human being. Only humans have language, nobody else has language. And all our activities that take place through language, even if you are a student of physics, you need language. Even if you are a student of history, you need language. Not that you need language only if you are a student of English language or any other language. So language is so important, and therefore it needs to be understood that to what level our student has mastered that language. European framework comes out with 6 levels, as Parul Ben said, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and they refer to different degrees of your proficiency in that language. In European framework, why it is not absolutely acceptable to us, the point is that this is meant for European students, and all the European languages, they have one root language, and therefore they do not differ primarily in their very ontology of the language. And therefore it becomes easy for one French student to move to another European language, be it German, be it English, be it Spanish, whatever. But in India it is not so. We have so many languages coming out of different languages, different roots. some are from Tamil, some are from Sanskrit, some are from some other languages. And therefore, though we learn English, all of us learn English, but all of us learn English in different ways. All of us speak English in different ways. All of us need different type of remedial teaching in English. And therefore, when we have to take such kind of tests, that which level a certain student belongs to, because only reading, writing will not do that, is very vague. Somebody may be able to read literally, but may not understand anything. And somebody may read from one word so many things. Our level of deriving meaning from words, from phrases, from sentences, paragraphs differs from person to person. All of them are reading. So if you tick, you are absolutely correct that you can read. But literal reading has no meaning. There are different types of readings. And so now European framework has shifted to functions in a way, and which is very much necessary. Language for which purpose? For which purpose you need language? Because language is used for every purpose. Even silence is also language. So that is something which we cannot be free from. Only when person dies, then language in fact goes away from him. Right from the birth till death, we need language. And we feel absolutely handicapped when we do not have language. And so identifying the functional level of proficiency of each and every individual is necessary. We will have to do in such a manner that if I talk of only English, then we will have to focus on standard Indian English. Now it is recognized. And English has been given the same space as it is given to British English and American English. Now it is Indian English. There are researches available on grammar of Indian English, phonology of Indian English, structure of Indian English, all kinds of things, morphology of Indian English, because our morphology is also differ to some extent. And so it has got an independent identity. So that identity we have to keep in the mind and prepare a sort of testing of the level of language proficiency, keeping that standard in mind. No doubt it will not solve the problem completely, but it will certainly make our problem easy to understand and easy to address. So one, that we prepare our own framework, we start testing our own students or students who come to India either for job or for, you can say, education. And it should not be, right now we say TOEFL and IELTS, that will not do. Somebody may have scored very well in both of them and may be finding it very difficult to function effectively in our classroom. So we will have to keep our content also in our mind. What kind of Indian content? There are words, there are phrases, there are proverbs, there are ways of organizing the things and so on and so forth. If we can do this and we can devise our own thing, this is the right time that we start beginning. Then perhaps after 4 or 5 years, it is a massive work, we would be able to design our own levels of tests. And if we are able to do it, then we would be making things much, much smoother for the learners, for the teachers, for the employers, and also for the employees, or in short, for life. So I fully agree. We had discussed in Jadeja Sahib that we need to prepare this framework and we need to involve large number of scholars, researchers in this field and arrive at some major framework for Indian English. Thank you very much.
These kind of a framework, but without copying it. Now can we have quick reflections from other panelists if anybody wishes to make any addition, input before I move to the next panelist?
May I suggest, let everyone speak and
Okay.
then we will come.
Fine. Thank you, sir. So now, with your suggestion, I have the pleasure of inviting you to share
You are next speaker.
your views.
Okay, I think I'll just mention 2 or 3 things that need to be looked into when we are looking into a framework for reference for Indian languages. And we probably need to keep the blueprint of CEFR in mind in order to develop something which is Indian in nature. The first thing, of course, is that CFR is based on what is called the can-do statements. Yeah. So what it basically defines is how functionally languages operate in different contexts. So the context within which the CFR operates is mostly European. So if people, let's say from Portugal, travel to Spain and they need to have some functional knowledge of Spanish, then what are the kind of tasks that they can perform in Spanish is something that CFR defines in terms of the different 6 levels that we all know of: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, etc. But that's not the only thing that CFR does. So it's not simply the can-do statements. So the can-do statements are the person can do these things in listening, in speaking, in reading or writing. Because the CFR also talks about the content of that, right? So it's not simply what a person can do, but when we kind of translate it into, let's say, a testing practice, then we also need to think of what do we test. Okay? So what is the content of that test? What goes into the test itself in terms of content? Okay? This is the second thing that we need to keep in mind. And the third thing is, of course, the different kinds of test types, or the so if you know about international examination, then you know that the test types vary. Okay, so it's not simply a same kind of test that you have across. So for listening, they will have different types of test types. For speaking, they will have different types of test types. They are standardized, but yes, I mean, these are different kinds of test types. So when we think of a common Indian framework of reference for Indian languages, then we need to think in 3 different directions over a period of 5, 10, 15 years. One is, of course, the statements that define the functional proficiency of someone who speaks languages in India. Secondly, what goes in as content within those functional proficiencies. And the third, of course, which is probably a later stage, is the test types that you produce within that functional content. Okay, so it has to be 3-pronged in that sense if we have a framework of references. The second point that I wanted to make was very quickly again that CFR is, of course, remember, it talks across languages, so it is a multilingual framework. Now, which country better to use it than in India, where we have more than 1600 languages officially, probably more than that, and out of which we have around 25 scheduled languages. Now, if we talk about multilinguality, then we know also in India that contexts of multilinguality vary. So there are lots of young people in this room, and they would, I'm sure that you listen to your FMs or your DJs or whoever, and all of you would know that people mix languages. So what is known as translanguaging, what is known as mixed code or code mixing, and code switching happens quite a lot over here. Okay. So right now I might be speaking in English, but in a very informal context, I would be mixing different sorts of languages, that depending on the kind of language repertoire that I have. So I might have English, a bit of smattering of Gujarati, Hindi, my own mother tongue, which is Bangla, etc. And the context kind of defines the language mixings that we do, the language context that define it. So the multilingual framework that CFR has is a framework that is meant for monolingual societies. Okay, so if I am a Spanish speaker and I learn Portuguese, then the framework can test it for Portuguese, let's say. In India, we are born with 4 languages, if not more than that. Yeah. So if we are born with 3 or 4 languages at the same time, we need to think about what sort of a multilingual framework of references can we develop in terms of proficiency levels or functional proficiency of these languages. Okay, so as Mehta sir very rightly pointed out, that when students from abroad come over here and study over here, we can have a test of English for them. But if the same person, if a student, I'm sure many of you have ambitions and aspirations to get a job, which I'm sure everyone has, but imagine that you want to become a RJ in an FM channel. So what sort of test should we give you? Should we only test your English, or should we test your Hindi or your Gujarati? What levels of proficiency do we need in these three languages to be an RJ, etc., etc.? So all those things need to be thought about when we think about multilingualism as a resource. Finally, the third point that I wanted to make is that the CFR very clearly states that what it tests is functional proficiency, or what it aspires for is functional proficiency. In Indian context, and this might be, I mean, we need to think about it a bit more clearly. I think one of the things that we also need to include within this functional proficiency are the concepts of comprehensibility. And comprehensibility would play an important role in terms of functional proficiencies that we have. Primarily because one of the things that we might face, especially in terms of, if not standardized Englishes, because standardized Englishes again has variations across regions, one of the important aspects of a CFR would be the nature of comprehensibility that you would have. So for example, the idea of, let's say, vowel shifts in Gujarati or consonant shifts in Tamil, etc. Okay, so these aspects, this finer fine-tuning, the finer what are known as the suprasegmental features of language, or the non-generic features of language, also need to be taken into consideration very, very carefully when we look at CIFR. With these in mind, I'm pretty sure that we can develop one, but we'll have to think through these very, very carefully. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, sir, for your inputs. Now, straightway, I would now request Professor Sunil Shah, sir, to give his views on this.
I would like to start with one real life experience as far as CFR is concerned. Way back in 2015, I applied for a government post of assistant professor. And with lot of respect, it is known as Adhyapak Sahayak. Now, there were 5 marks in the merit for scope certificate. Okay, it's a Bulet's scope certificate. And I had, if I'm not wrong, it was C1. That was my score. And then we claimed that, and there is a verification process done by the KCG. And there were people from, government engineering colleges. They were assistant professors. They were verifying these documents. And then when it came to this Bulet's scope certificate, then the person saw the grade and it says C1. And he said in Gujarati, "Sir, ana to marks na made." I asked why, sir? Because it is C1. A highest hoy ne, sir. Okay. So that is the level of understanding. In fact, we need that awareness. And finally, then I told him, you please check with your seniors. Na, mane khabar chhe. Age highest hoy, and C niche hoy. And then we, even Bhaskar was there. We had to, make a representation to the senior authorities, and finally they agreed, and I could get 5 marks. And it was amazing experience. So I was talking from the level of awareness. That is where we'll have to start with. Okay. Now, if we talk about a few initiatives taken as far as Indian framework is concerned, we would also discuss whether we should call it as common framework, common Indian framework, as it is called in common European framework. Why we need to call it common, or we can call it something else. A few initiatives taken at India level, means a lot of work has already been done, but I would say not concrete. A lot of work is to be done. Like Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore, they have developed proficiency test for several Indian languages, including Hindi, Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, Urdu. Maharashtra and Karnataka have also developed their own proficiency test for languages like Marathi, Kannada, and Konkani. CBSE, they have their own proficiency test. NCERT has developed a framework for teaching Hindi as a second language. Indian Council of Social Science, that is ICSSR, they have proposed a project and people are working on it. Kendriya Hindi Sansthan has developed a proficiency test for Hindi language learners, which assesses learners' listening, speaking, reading and writing skills. National Council for Promotion of Urdu Language, that is acronym is NCPUL, has developed a framework for assessing Urdu language proficiency. Central Institute of Indian Languages, they are working on, in fact they have developed a proficiency scale. Now a lot of work has already been done, but then as I said earlier, something concrete, we need to take it further. Now if we look at the national education policy, it emphasizes the importance of multilingualism and promotion of local languages in India. Now this policy calls for development of standardized language proficiency test and assessment for Indian languages. So we hardly, in fact we need this Indian framework of reference for languages. National Education Policy 2020 also, it has included a proposal for development of National Language Translation Mission, which is aimed at promoting multilingualism and facilitating translation between Indian languages. So this policy, in fact, we'll have to work in the requirement and with national education policy also. And I second to what Kamal Mehta sir has said about the need of Indian framework of reference. But yeah, we all of us need to work together, and it will take a lot of time, but we need this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunil bhai. Now, last but not least, in Gujarati we say, Nano pan raino dano. And one who has been actively working with IBP. So now, may I request Mr. Arindam Banerjee to share his views on the possibility of the discussion that we are having.
Continuing with the same person narrative that Sunil sir just now shared, my first introduction to the CAFR levels was when I graduated from the institute and joined as a postgraduate teacher of English in a CBSE school in Anand. And later on I moved on to different schools, and wherein once it so happened that somewhere in the year 2011 that CBSE came up with a pilot project wherein they introduced something called as ASL, Assessment of Speaking and Listening Skills, which they had developed in collaboration with Trinity College London. And that is where when we first were introduced to the CFR levels and the can-do statements that Atanu sir was just referring to. And that is when we realized that there is much more to language and literature when it comes to practical teaching of English in CBSE schools, not only CBSE schools, but then most of the schools that follow the state board curriculum all across Gujarat and in other states of India as well. And based on that particular CFR, that framework, CBSE and in association with Trinity College, they had developed a particular framework of reference, or rather an assessment criteria for particularly for speaking and for writing purposes. For all students, it started from grade 9 and grade 11, which was later on continued in other grades as well. And that is when we were introduced to the different types of assessment criteria, the rubrics, the function, and we saw practically how useful this assessment and these rubrics were for how beneficial it was, not only for the development of the teachers but also for students. And most of these standardized tests that sir was earlier referring to, for instance the IELTS, TOEFL and other Cambridge suite of exams like the school-based exams like WILE, CAT, PET and others, they all are mapped to the CAFR levels. So in a way, they all test language proficiency in 4 language areas, that is listening, reading, writing and speaking. And the possibility of having a common Indian framework of references, the very thought, the very idea is quite intriguing and quite wonderful, because the way these tests that are popular across the world have been monetized owing to their global implication in the world. I'm not sure how a test that is framed on the lines of the common Indian framework of reference will work out. I'm not sure. There is still a lot to be learned, rather a lot of awareness is required, like Sir said. So once it is there in action, I'm sure that it will help to bridge the gap between the world of academia and the industrial needs or the demands of the industry that we have currently in the Indian subcontinent. That's what I feel is all about the common Indian framework of reference. If anyone has any questions regarding the CAFR or the kind of work that is happening in CBSE schools regarding the application of CAFR and the assessment of speaking and listening skills, and I'm open to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arindam, for sharing your views. Now, may I request esteemed panelists to reflect on whatever has been actually shared by other members. That is what actually it was decided that I would invite Jadeja sir last, so that he can sum up, and whatever is missed by others, something that which we have not thought of. So because my earlier plan was to invite him first, so it was in my mind that only. I am extremely sorry for that, sir. May I now request you to share your words? What do you think? Because basically this idea of CIFR came from him only. He is the one who gave this idea that why not to have this kind of a thing, because we are a multilingual society and this is what we need the most. Jadeja sir.
We have run out of time already, but I would like to make 3 or 4 points very quickly, and then maybe sometime in future we may have a whole one-day conference on CIFR where young scholars can do their homework, come back and teach us more about this. The first point I would like to make is that although we are all teachers of English, and at the moment we are talking about CEFR with reference to teaching of English in European countries, CEFR is not a framework for teaching of English. It's a framework for teaching of European languages in Europe basically, but all across the world. And gradually, in fact, it has developed into a framework which people in other parts of the world have also started using for their own languages. Like Japan, for example, is already using CEFR for Japanese. So that is the first point we need to realize, we need to understand, that if we are working on a common Indian framework of reference, English is an Indian language and therefore it will be about English, number one. Because teachers of English are already using CEFR in a number of ways, I think it will be used, or it will be created, the initial framework will be created mainly by teachers of English. That is also true. But we need to remember that it will be a framework for teaching and learning of Indian languages in India or outside India. So that is the first most important point. The second point that I would like to make is that CEFR has led to very concrete results, including the monetization of their work, hugely popular, not only for teaching and learning, largely for testing, in fact. And I think it's a multi-million-dollar industry now, which uses this framework. So that is an important issue, but it is not a primary issue. Testing is something that would come into picture at a later stage. The framework would be first useful to teachers and learners. So it has to be worked out as a framework for teaching and learning of languages. And at some point we have to create standardized framework for levels of proficiency. It may or may not be the 6 levels that CEFR has adopted. It may or may not have only listening, speaking, reading, writing as the categories of proficiency, and so on. So that is the second point. The third point I would like to make is that although it's a huge task, I think it is doable in the sense that when CEFR was taken up, they had to start from a scratch. CEFR started happening when teaching and learning of languages was largely form focused. And not only teaching, but even testing was happening largely form focused. These linguists, not only American and British linguists who specialized in English, but even French, German, and other language experts, these linguists, came together, and when they asked themselves whether they can create a common framework, it was at that time that they decided to create a pool of descriptors. And the descriptors finally took the form of can-do statements. And that led to a major shift from form-focused language teaching and learning to function-focused language teaching and learning. So, to my mind, the multi-million-dollar industry supported by CEFR is a side product. The major advantage, the major benefit that happened in terms of human history was that we got an understanding of language learning and teaching in terms of the functional descriptors. And so we began to realize that language proficiency should not be considered to be form-based abilities to understand and describe language, but language proficiency should be understood in terms of function-based ability to use language. Now, this is the awareness that we were talking about, and if we want to bring about a major change in language learning and teaching in India, then the first thing we need to do is that language teachers have to stop thinking that I am an expert in Gujarati because I know Gujarati grammar. The teaching of Indian languages in our schools, in other states also, as far as I know, is form focused. at the moment. With all the advantage of our exposure to applied linguistics, educational linguistics, we know that we have to go beyond form-focused language teaching and learning, that we should be able to adopt functional language teaching and learning, but it cannot be done if we do not have a framework of reference with descriptors for our own languages. So, what I am saying is that a framework of references for Indian languages would be very useful, not only because people coming from other countries to India would probably be tested using that framework. It would definitely be a great advantage, not only because someone in Europe has done it in a particular manner, so we can quickly copy it or translate it and create our own framework. I think it would be something more fundamental than that, far-reaching than that. And it would require our understanding of language education with reference to the purposes for which languages are used in India. The CEFR, the European model, as Professor Atanu Bhattacharya rightly pointed out, is based on the model of monolingual framework. In India, we will have to create a framework that is multilingual. Now, that means a fundamental shift. Once again, the European view of language is different from the Indian view, the Indian philosophy of language. And therefore, in our perspective, in our framework, we will probably need to go beyond the C2 descriptors, or even at the lower level, our descriptors will probably include our understanding of how a child interacts with the universe, the Indian understanding of what happens, and so on. Therefore, I think it is good that all the panelists have given a very positive response to this idea. But what I believe we need to do is educate ourselves first about what is a framework of reference, how such a framework can be created, what are different things that we need to do to create such a framework, what are the advantages or benefits of having such a framework, who would probably benefit from it in such a manner that they will be willing to support it ideologically, financially, and so on, politically also. Language is closely related to politics. How will it help us in translating NEP into our classrooms in a more meaningful manner? And eventually, of course, how can it lead to monetization? What are the implications for India becoming Vishwa Guru, and the need for a framework of reference? So, it's a wide arena of issues, rather complex issues, but I believe that it is something doable because we will not be starting from a scratch. We already have a pulsating, vibrant framework of reference which is internationally in use right now. We only need to see in what ways a framework that is more suitable in India will be similar to CEFR and in what ways it will be different from CEFR. So, for us, as they say, we are standing on the shoulders of our earlier scholars, and for us it is not the kind of challenge that they were facing. I think it is more doable. The only thing is our young scholars have to realize that this is an area of research in which they need to invest their mind. Research guides have to realize that this is some area where they should lead the young scholars and allow them to work so that we can work together, some institutions can come together and help create at least the first fundamental level of a proposed framework that can then be taken forward. One step before that, of course, would be to create a white paper which would state what is a framework of reference, what happened in Europe, why do we need a framework of reference in India, what are the sort of things that we may need to do if we want to create such a framework, who will benefit from this, and what are the future possibilities. If you think of it like this, then I think you will have an outline of a white paper, and the group of scholars, anyone who is interested, should then take that white paper forward, contribute to it further, come together, as I said, in a day-long discussion, and we may possibly have something more concrete in this direction. I would like views from the scholars sitting in front of us as well as from the panelists to
all those who have been listening very patiently to all the esteemed panelist member. If you have some queries, some doubts, some questions, like to know more about what they have discussed, please raise your hand or maybe stand up and the volunteers would come to you.
We all know the fact that we are a multilingual country. Supposing I'm a Gujarati and we're creating a framework of reference for Gujarati. Now, there's somebody who's not a Gujarati and he is in Gujarat. For him, Gujarati would be a second language. Now, will the framework of reference that is created for Gujarati as a first language be applicable to the framework of reference for someone for whom Gujarati is a second language? So, because of this multilinguality, the frameworks which are language specific, would it remain same, or should it have, say, for example, a framework of a particular language when it is a first language, and framework of reference for a language when it is a second language? Would require some deliberations and discussions.
I think it's a very valid point. The only thing that I have to say about this is that when we talk about first language, second language, or third language in Indian context, then I think we are still kind of trapped in the idea of the form. Because when we look at CFR, so if you look at the 6 levels, then they do not really say whether Spanish is your first language or Portuguese is your second language, etc. They are more concerned about the functionality of the language. So it's highly possible that if I'm a Hindi speaker in Gujarat and that's my first language, I might have a C2 level in Hindi. But it's also highly possible, because you have the framework available, that I might have, let's say, a B2 level in Gujarati. But the framework is able to judge both of them. So that's the nature of the framework. So it doesn't really matter whether you have a second language or a third language or a fourth language, etc., because the framework is capable of measuring, or at least articulating, the differences in terms of your proficiency. So I think that should be. Someone else wants to add.
One challenge is there, and that challenge is we have been working in different areas. India has a great variety. Variety in the terms of area. For example, there are areas, urban areas, semi-urban areas, rural areas. So the people who are working in rural areas, for example, I am working in rural area. So when we are framing such kind of things, they are really great things. They are really great things. But when we are working in rural areas, so we have to think in that direction, that what can be beneficial to the students who are working. For example, when we are going to make all these things, we are using these things in the syllabus. For example, if we are going to implement all these things, we are going to take these things into the classroom. Okay, so in a way we are going to make syllabus. So when we are implementing all these things in syllabus, we have to think in such a direction that there are areas, urban area students, they are very much good exposure for learning a language. But as far as the students who are in who are working in who are studying in rural area, the tribal part of Daud or tribal part of Dang and other areas, they are really having great challenges. So when we are framing all these things, we have to think in that direction. You have made a great point, but we have to think this thing also. Thank you, sir.
Rightly said. That is why we are here, that what are the possible challenges that we can have and what considerations should we keep in mind when are thinking in the direction of this. Any other question? So I think within this short span of time, we have been able to at least discuss whether we need this kind of a thing, and majority of the panelists, all the four I would say, have agreed that yes, we should and we can. Mr. Arindam, he very beautifully said the idea is wonderful and ended with but. So definitely that much positive he is also, that idea is wonderful and it is needed. And so we first thing that we conclude here that we need this. Apart from that, we also discussed possible challenges. Now talking about all that, and very quickly I would summarize. Majority of them also agreed to the point that we need not copy CEFR. We need to have our own vision, that what do we want in CIFR and why do we want it also. That much also we are clear. Now the major question is, how can we go about it? And for that also, Jadeja sir has also suggested that we can meet frequently. Those who believe in the idea can work together and let us explore this, because that has been also suggested that being a multilingual country, we need to see that this plurality help us. And because it is a multi-million industry, as you rightly pointed out, maybe when we go for CIFR, it would create more job opportunities for the teachers of other languages also, because we are welcoming foreign scholars, foreign students to India. So what Mehta sir said, that when we go to some foreign country, we have to appear for various tests. But when other students come to India, they did not, or they do not have any such examination. So maybe such a framework in future can help them also, so that they can communicate with the local people in a better manner. So with this, on a positive note, I would say that this institution has the history of going on the road which has not been trodden. And maybe this idea also carry forward that legacy. And with this young generation over here and the support of all these experienced people, I'm sure the intention with which we have started this will definitely, if not in near future, after few years, it would materialize, it would become reality, and we can take pride that we were there when this idea was discussed. Okay, so on that note, and in the words of Neil Armstrong, right, he said that a small step for man, but a giant step for the mankind. And maybe this may become reality in our case, in case of this idea also. Oh yes. Gender neutral. So I am really thankful to all the panelists for giving their precious time, sharing their views, and to the audience and all those who raised the questions, because this requires lots of brainstorming. I'm really thankful to the organization for giving me this opportunity to be here, to listen to all. Thank you very much. And with this, the food for mind was there. It is there with you. Panelists are with you. Maybe we can discuss further while having lunch also. Thank you.